Hello, and welcome back to our quiet corner of the night. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend these peaceful moments with me as we drift towards sleep together. Tonight, we're going to travel way back, to a time when the world felt both smaller and infinitely more mysterious. We're going to visit ancient Greece, around 600 years before Christ was born, to meet a man named Thales, who had the audacity to look at everything around him and declare that it all came from water. Now, before you think this sounds like the kind of conversation you'd overhear at a particularly pretentious coffee shop, let me assure you that Thales was onto something profound, something that might just help us understand not only the ancient world, but the flowing nature of our own thoughts as we prepare for sleep. So settle in, let your shoulders drop, and let's walk together along the Mediterranean coast, where philosophy was born from the simple act of watching waves meet the shore. Our story tonight is about water, but really, it's about the courage to see connections where others see only separate things. It's about finding the unity beneath all the complexity, which, when you think about it, is exactly what sleep does for our busy minds. Picture, if you will, the ancient city of Miletus, situated on the western coast of what we now call Turkey, where the Aegean Sea laps gently against rocky shores that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. The year is around 585 BCE, and Miletus is a bustling trading port. Merchants arrive daily with their ships heavy with goods from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and distant lands whose names are whispered like prayers. The air smells of salt and spices, of olive oil and fresh fish, of the kind of life that happens when people from different worlds come together at the water's edge. In this city lives our protagonist, Thales, a man who would become known as the first philosopher in Western history, though he probably would have laughed at such a title. To his neighbors, he was simply the guy who was always looking at the stars, looking at the sea, looking at raindrops and leaves with the intensity of someone who believed the universe was trying to tell him something. Thales had what we might politely call an obsessive personality. While other merchants were calculating profits, Thales was calculating the movements of celestial bodies. While others were gossiping about politics, Thales was pondering why ice melts and why clouds form, and why his reflection wavered in the well water. He was, in other words, exactly the kind of person you'd expect to fall into a well while stargazing, which, according to legend, he actually did. A Thracian servant girl reportedly laughed at him, saying he was so eager to know what was happening in the sky that he couldn't see what was right at his feet. But perhaps Thales understood something that the servant girl didn't. Perhaps he knew that sometimes you have to be willing to fall into the very thing you're trying to understand. Our story proper begins on a morning when the Mediterranean was unusually calm, the kind of morning when the sea looks like polished bronze and the horizon seems close enough to touch. Thales stood on the harbor's edge, watching the fishermen prepare their nets, and something clicked in his mind, like the sound of a pebble dropping into still water. He had been thinking, you see, about a question that had been troubling him for months. What is everything made of? Not just the obvious things like chairs made of wood or jewelry made of gold, but everything. The wood itself, the gold itself, the flesh of fish, the breath in his lungs, the thoughts in his head. Most people in his time would have answered with stories about gods. Chaos giving birth to earth, earth giving birth to sky, sky dancing with sea to create all the myriad forms of life. Beautiful stories, comforting stories. But Thales wanted something different. He wanted an answer that didn't require him to believe in divine drama. He wanted to find the one thing that could become all other things through perfectly natural processes. And on this particular morning, watching the mist rise from the calm sea, watching it condense into droplets on the rigging of ships, watching those droplets fall back into the harbor, he thought he had found his answer. Water. Now, you might think this sounds almost childishly simple, and in a way it is. But consider what Thales was actually seeing with his philosopher's eyes. He watched water become vapor, invisible, ethereal, rising toward the heavens like the breath of the earth itself. He watched that same vapor condense back into liquid, gathering, flowing, seeking the lowest places, with a kind of humble persistence. He watched water freeze into ice, solid, crystalline, taking on entirely new properties while remaining essentially itself. Three states of the same substance, and if water could transform so dramatically while remaining water, why couldn't it transform into everything else as well? Thales began to see water everywhere, and I mean everywhere. The sap in trees was clearly a form of water. The blood in animals was obviously water with certain modifications. Even apparently dry things like rocks must contain water. How else could they be worn smooth by rivers? How else could plants grow from them? But the real breakthrough came when he considered something that seems obvious to us now, but was revolutionary then. The idea that natural phenomena had natural causes. You see, Thales wasn't just proposing that everything was made of water. He was proposing that everything could be understood, that the universe operated according to principles that human reason could grasp, that you didn't need to consult oracles or perform sacrifices to understand why earthquakes happened. You just needed to think clearly about how water behaves under pressure. His theory about earthquakes, by the way, was that the earth floated on a vast ocean, and earthquakes were simply the result of waves rocking our terrestrial boat. Not quite right, as we now know, but beautifully logical given what he could observe. What fascinates me about Thales is how he combined the most practical observations with the most expansive imagination. He was simultaneously the kind of person who could predict eclipses, and the kind of person who believed that magnets had souls because they could move iron without touching it. He lived at the intersection of mythology and science, in that beautiful moment when human beings first began to suspect that the universe might be stranger and more wonderful than any story they had yet told about it. Let's pause here for a moment and do what Thales might have done. Let's really think about water. Think about the water in your own body right now, flowing through your veins, carrying nutrients to every cell, carrying away the waste products of living. Think about how your tears are water, how your saliva is water, how even your thoughts depend on the flow of water-based fluids between neurons. Think about the water that fell as rain on the roof above you, the same water that once flowed in rivers, that once rose as mist from ancient seas, that once nourished the forests where your ancestors gathered food. You are, quite literally, made of the same substance that carved the Grand Canyon. that reflects the moon on quiet nights, that freezes into snowflakes of impossible delicacy, and melts into the muddy rivers of spring. Thales saw this connection, this fundamental unity beneath apparent diversity, and perhaps that's why his theory feels so peaceful, so reassuring. It suggests that we are not separate from the world. We are the world, temporarily organized into the form of human consciousness, like a wave that rises from the ocean and will eventually return to it. As word of Thales' theory spread throughout the Greek world, it sparked what we might call humanity's first scientific revolution. His students and intellectual descendants began proposing their own fundamental substances. Anaximenes suggested air, Heraclitus championed fire, Empedocles proposed 4 elements working in combination. But they were all following the path that Thales had first walked, the path of looking for natural explanations for natural phenomena, the path of believing that human reason could penetrate the mysteries of existence. And perhaps most importantly, they were all grappling with what we might call the philosophical problem of the one and the many. How can reality be both unified and diverse? How can everything be made of the same stuff and yet be so magnificently different? Thales' answer was elegant in its simplicity. Everything flows from the same source, like streams flowing from a mountain spring. Diversity is not the opposite of unity. It's unity expressing itself in countless creative ways. Now, as we near the end of our time with Thales, let's consider what his ancient insight might mean for us. Here in our modern world, in our modern bodies, preparing for sleep. There's something profoundly comforting about the idea that everything is connected at the most fundamental level. In our daily lives, we often feel fragmented, pulled in different directions by work and relationships and responsibilities and dreams. We feel separate from nature, separate from each other, sometimes even separate from ourselves. But Thales reminds us that this separation is, in a sense, an illusion. We are not isolated islands of consciousness floating in an alien universe. We are temporary formations of the same cosmic substance that forms everything else. When you feel overwhelmed by the complexity of modern life, when the news feels too heavy, and your to-do list feels too long, and your problems feel uniquely yours, remember water. Remember that complexity is often just simplicity expressing itself in elaborate ways. The anxiety in your chest is made of the same fundamental stuff as the peace you feel beside a quiet lake. The thoughts that keep you awake are made of the same substance as the dreams that will soon carry you into sleep. There's another lesson here about the nature of wisdom itself. Thales didn't arrive at his insights through pure logic or divine revelation. He arrived at them through patient observation, through the willingness to really see what was in front of him. Water taught him about transformation, about how something can change its form completely while remaining essentially itself, about how the gentlest force, applied consistently over time, can reshape the hardest stone. This is the way wisdom works in our own lives, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through the patient accumulation of small insights, not through forcing our way to understanding, but through learning to flow around obstacles, to find the path of least resistance that leads eventually to our destination. Like waters, wisdom is humble. It doesn't make a lot of noise. It doesn't insist on its own importance. It simply persists. finding its way into every crack and crevice of experience, slowly but inexorably changing the landscape of our understanding. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might think about the water cycle that Thales observed so carefully, the endless circulation of the same precious substance from sea to sky, to rain to river, and back to sea again. Your consciousness follows a similar cycle, from waking to dreaming to deep sleep, and back to waking. The same awareness that is reading these words right now will soon dissolve into dreams, and then into the vast oceanic unconsciousness of deep sleep, only to emerge again tomorrow morning, refreshed and renewed. This is not death. This is transformation. This is the natural rhythm of a universe that wastes nothing, that recycles everything, that know how to let go of forms without losing essence. Trust this process. Trust the wisdom of your own nature, which knows exactly how to let consciousness flow from one state to another, like water, finding its own level. And so we come to the end of our journey with Thales, this ancient Greek philosopher who looked at the world around him and saw not chaos, but connection, not complexity, but elegant simplicity, not separation, but the flowing unity that underlies all apparent diversity. Perhaps tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you'll remember his insight, that everything flows from the same source, returns to the same source, and is connected at level deeper than our everyday awareness can grasp. Perhaps you'll feel less alone, knowing that you are part of the same cosmic story that began with the first rainfall on the first rocks of the first continents, that your dreams tonight will be woven from the same mysterious substance that forms galaxies and flowers and the laughter of children. Let your breathing become like the rhythm of waves, in and out, as natural and effortless as water flowing downhill. Let your thoughts become like mist rising from a quiet lake, less and less substantial, dissolving into the vast spaciousness of approaching sleep. Let your body sink into your bed, like a stone settling into riverbed sand, finding its natural resting place, held and supported by forces larger and more patient than any worry you might be carrying. And as consciousness flows from waking into dreaming, remember Thales, standing by the Mediterranean, understanding for the first time that everything is connected, everything flows, everything returns to the source. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the wisdom of water, flowing, transforming, connecting all things in the vast, gentle unity of existence. Good night. Let's begin the second part of the story. The first part of our journey brought us to the edge of understanding. But, as any wise person knows, the edge is often where the most interesting things happen. Tonight, we travel back to ancient Athens, to a marketplace that smelled of figs and philosophy, where a man who claimed to know nothing somehow knew everything. So settle deeper into your pillow, let your breathing slow, and prepare to meet the most curious character in all of Greece. Picture, if you will, the Athenian Agora on a particularly ordinary Tuesday in 399 BCE. The sun hangs lazy and golden, casting long shadows between the marble columns. Merchants hawk their wares with the enthusiasm of people who genuinely believe their olives are superior to everyone else's olives, which, let's be honest, they probably are. In the center of this bustling marketplace stands a man who looks, well, let's say he wouldn't win any ancient Greek beauty contests. His name is Socrates, and he has the face of someone who's been thinking very hard for about 70 years. His beard is wild, his robes are simple, and his sandals have seen better decades. But his eyes sparkle with something that makes people stop mid-purchase and forget whether they came for pottery or philosophy. Today, Socrates encounters 3 visitors to Athens. First, there's Glaucon, a young nobleman who believes he knows everything about justice because he's read all the right scrolls. His toga is perfectly pressed, his confidence unshakable, and his certainty, well, we'll see about that. Then there's Menno, a successful merchant who's built his fortune on knowing exactly what people want and exactly how to get it. He speaks in rapid bursts, counts coins in his sleep, and has never met a problem that couldn't be solved with the right transaction. And finally, there's Thales, a brilliant young mathematician who can calculate the circumference of any circle, but somehow can't figure out why he feels so empty when he looks at the stars. Each of them approaches Socrates with questions. None of them realize they're about to discover something far more valuable than answers. Glaucon strides up to Socrates with the confidence of someone who's never doubted himself. "Socrates," he announces, his voice carrying across the marketplace, "I've been studying the nature of justice, and I believe I understand it completely." Socrates looks up from where he's been watching an ant carry a crumb 3 times its size. "How wonderful," he says mildly. "I've been wondering about justice myself. Perhaps you could teach me." Glaucon puffs up like a peacock. "Gladly. Justice is simply giving each person what they deserve." "Ah," nods Socrates, stroking his beard. "And what does a person deserve?" "Well, that's obvious. Good people deserve good things. Bad people deserve punishment." "I see. And how do we know who is good and who is bad?" Glaucon's confidence wavers slightly, like a flame in a gentle breeze. "Well, good people follow the laws and respect their elders and contribute to society." "Interesting," Socrates muses. "So, if someone follows an unjust law, are they good? But laws can't be unjust. They're made by wise rulers. Are all rulers wise?" You can almost see the gears turning in Glaucon's mind, like an old mill wheel creaking to life. His perfectly pressed toga suddenly feels a bit tight around the collar. "Well, I suppose some rulers might make mistakes. So laws might sometimes be wrong. Perhaps occasionally. Then how do we know which laws to follow?" Glaucon opens his mouth, then closes it, opens it again. A fish would be proud of the impression. Finally, quietly, I'm not sure." Socrates smiles, and it's the gentlest smile you've ever heard. "How beautiful," he says. "You've just discovered the most valuable thing in the world." "What's that?" "The wisdom of knowing that you don't know." And just like that, Glaucon's certainty transforms into curiosity. His shoulders relax, his breathing deepens. He sits down on a nearby stone, no longer the teacher, but suddenly, wonderfully, a student again. As Glaucon settles into contemplation, Menno approaches like a small whirlwind of efficiency. He's counting something on his fingers, probably profits. and his eyes dart around the marketplace cataloging opportunities. "Socrates," he calls out, "I need your help settling a business dispute. Two men claim to have the secret to success, and I need to know which one is right, so I can invest accordingly." Socrates turns from the ant he's still watching. It's now recruited two friends for the crumb-moving operation. "Success," he repeats slowly, as if tasting the word. "What is success, Meno?" Meno laughs. "Come now, Socrates. Don't play games. Success is obvious. Wealth, influence, the respect of others." "Ah, so a successful person is wealthy?" "Of course. And is a wealthy person always successful?" Meno's rapid-fire confidence begins to slow, like a wheel losing momentum. "Well, yes, I mean, obviously. I once knew a man," Socrates says conversationally, "who had more gold than he could count, but he couldn't sleep at night for fear of losing it. He trusted no one, loved nothing, and died alone, surrounded by treasure and emptiness. Was he successful?" Meno's finger-counting stops. That's different. Real success means being content with your wealth. So success is contentment? Yes. No. Wait. Meno's voice trails off like an echo fading in a canyon. "Tell me, Meno, have you ever met someone who was poor in coins but rich in joy?" Meno thinks of his old teacher who lived in a tiny house with nothing but books, and somehow always seemed to be smiling. Yes. And someone who had everything they thought they wanted but still felt empty? Meno's shoulders sag as he realizes he might be describing himself. "Yes. So, perhaps," Socrates suggests gently, "success is not what we have, but how we are." "But then," Meno whispers, "how do we measure it? How do we know if we're succeeding?" Socrates' eyes twinkle. "What a magnificent question! Shall we explore it together?" And Meno, the man who came seeking investment advice, finds himself investing in something far more valuable: the patient work of understanding himself. As the afternoon light grows softer, painting the marble columns in shades of honey and gold, young Theaetetus approaches. He's been watching the previous conversations with the intensity of someone solving a particularly challenging equation. "Socrates," he says carefully, "I understand mathematics. I can prove theorems, calculate areas, predict the movements of celestial bodies, but I don't understand this." He gestures vaguely at the world around them. "How do you know what questions to ask?" Socrates looks at the young mathematician with something like tenderness. "What do you think knowledge is, Theaetetus?" "Knowledge is facts, proven truths, things we can demonstrate with certainty." "Show me some knowledge, then." Theaetetus brightens, back in familiar territory. 2 + 2 = 4. The angles of a triangle sum to 180 degrees. The circumference of a circle is pi times its diameter. "Beautiful," Socrates agrees. "And do these truths make you happy?" The question lands like a pebble in still water, creating ripples of confusion. "Happy? They're just true. Truth doesn't need to make us happy, doesn't it?" Socrates asks mildly. "Then why do you study mathematics?" Because it's beautiful. Because when I solve a proof, something inside me lights up." "Ah," says Socrates, "so truth and beauty are connected. I never thought about it that way. And when you feel that light inside you, are you more yourself or less yourself?" Thales considers this with the same careful attention he'd give a geometric proof. More myself. Definitely more myself. So, perhaps, Socrates suggests, the most important knowledge isn't facts about triangles, but facts about who you are when you're most alive. The young mathematician sits down slowly, as if a great weight has been lifted from his shoulders. But how do we study that? How do we prove who we are? Socrates smiles, and in that smile is the warmth of a teacher who's just watched a student take their first step into a larger world. Perhaps, he says, we don't prove it. Perhaps we live it. As the three seekers sit in comfortable contemplation, the marketplace begins to quiet. The merchants pack up their wares, the arguments fade to murmurs, and the great golden disk of the sun starts its slow descent toward the horizon. Socrates looks at his three companions, the nobleman who discovered humility, the merchant who found questions more valuable than answers, and the mathematician learning to calculate the dimensions of his own soul. You know, he says conversationally, when I was a young man, I thought the wisest person would be the one who knew the most facts. I collected knowledge like some people collect pottery, always looking for the next piece to complete the set. But knowledge, I discovered, is like water. You can't hold it in your hands. The moment you think you've grasped it completely, it flows between your fingers. Glaucon looks up. Then how do we learn anything? Ah, Socrates chuckles. We learn by admitting we don't know. Every question answered births 3 new questions. Every certainty, examined closely, reveals itself as another mystery. Think of it this way, he continues, settling more comfortably on his stone. Imagine knowledge as a great dark forest. Most people stay at the edge, claiming to know all about forests because they've seen the first few trees. But the wise person knows that the deeper you go, the darker it gets, and the more you realize how vast the forest truly is. Menno shifts uncomfortably, but surely some things can be known with certainty. Can they? Socrates asks, what's the most certain thing you know? I know I exist. Do you? What is this I that exists? Are you your body, your thoughts, your memories, your feelings? The question hangs in the air like incense, sweet and mysterious. When I was young, Thales says slowly, I was certain I was my intelligence. Then I grew older and thought I was my achievements. Now I'm not sure what I am. How wonderful, Socrates exclaims, and his joy is genuine. You've just discovered the most liberating truth in the world. You don't know what you are, which means you're free to become anything. But doesn't that make life uncertain, scary? Glaucon asks. Socrates considers this, watching a late bee visiting the last flowers of the day. Is the bee afraid because it doesn't know which flower it will visit next, or is it free to choose the sweetest nectar? Uncertainty, he continues, is not the enemy of wisdom. It's the soil in which wisdom grows. When we know everything, we stop learning. When we have all the answers, we stop asking questions. But when we're completely certain, we stop growing. So the oracle was right, he muses, almost to himself. She said I was the wisest man in Athens, not because I knew more than others, but because I knew that I knew nothing. And in that knowing, I found the greatest freedom of all, the freedom to remain curious forever. As the sun settles lower, painting the world in shades of amber and rose, the 4 men sit in comfortable silence. Around them, The city prepares for sleep. Children are called in from play. Merchants secure their stalls, and the first stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. You know what I find most beautiful about not knowing? Socrates says finally, it means every day is an adventure. Every conversation is a discovery. Every person you meet is a teacher. And every question is a doorway to somewhere you've never been. We spend so much energy trying to appear wise, he continues, that we forget the joy of being foolish. We're so busy having answers that we miss the beauty of questions. We're so focused on being right that we overlook the wonder of being wrong. But when you embrace not knowing, then the whole world becomes your classroom, and every moment becomes your teacher. The stars are fully visible now, scattered across the dark canvas of the sky like seeds of light. The marketplace is quiet, except for the gentle sound of wind through the olive trees and the distant murmur of the city settling into sleep. One by one, the three visitors prepare to leave. Glaucon stands first, his movements slower and more thoughtful than when he arrived. Socrates, he says, I came here knowing everything about justice. I'm leaving knowing nothing about it. Yet somehow, I feel wiser. Socrates nods. That's because wisdom isn't what we know. It's how comfortable we are with mystery. Meno gathers his robes, his earlier urgency replaced by something like pace. I've spent my whole life chasing success. He says, tonight, I think I'll spend some time wondering what success actually means. The best investment you've ever made. Socrates agrees with a smile. Theaetetus is the last to rise, his young face thoughtful in the starlight. Will I see you again, Socrates? You'll see me, the old philosopher says gently. Every time you ask a question that opens your heart instead of closing your mind. Every time you choose wonder over certainty. Every time you remember that the most beautiful phrase in any language is, I don't know yet. As the three seekers disappear into the sleeping city, Socrates remains in the marketplace, looking up at the stars. An observer might wonder what he's thinking, what wisdom he's contemplating, what profound truth he's discovering. But if you listened very carefully, you might hear him whisper to the night sky, I wonder what those lights really are. And in that wonder, not knowing, not needing to know, but staying forever curious, there's a peace deeper than any answer could provide. The ancient philosopher sits in the starlight, comfortable with mystery, at home with questions, and rich beyond measure in the wealth of not knowing. The marketplace grows quiet. The stars shine on, and somewhere in the gentle space between questions and sleep, wisdom whispers its most important secret. The end of knowing is the beginning of understanding. And with that thought, as gentle as a summer breeze through olive trees, we let our own questions drift away into dreams, knowing that tomorrow will bring new mysteries to explore, new wonders to discover, and new ways to embrace the beautiful uncertainty of being human. Let's begin the third part of the story, where wisdom meets wonder, and the smallest things reveal the greatest truths. Tonight, we journey to ancient Greece, to a time when philosophers didn't just think about the world, they dreamed it into new shapes. We'll walk alongside a man who saw the invisible, who found infinity in a grain of sand, and who understood that sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from looking up at the stars, but from looking deeper into what already surrounds us. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and prepare to meet Democritus, the laughing philosopher who found the building blocks of everything. Picture, if you will, the Greek city of Abdera, around 400 years before the Common Era. The Mediterranean sun casts long shadows across white stone buildings, and olive trees shimmer in the gentle breeze. This is a place where merchants trade stories along with their goods, where ideas flow as freely as wine, and where a man named Democritus has just returned from the longest journey of his life. Democritus was not like other philosophers of his time. While others spent their days in heated debates about justice and virtue, important things, mind you, Democritus was fascinated by a different question entirely. What is everything made of? Now, you might think this is a simple question. After all, wood is made of wood, stone is made of stone, water is made of, well, water. But Democritus, who friends called the laughing philosopher because of his gentle humor about human folly, saw deeper than the obvious. He had spent years traveling to Egypt, where he learned from ancient priests, to Babylon, where he studied with mathematicians, to Persia, where he sat with wise men who spoke of invisible forces. He had used his entire inheritance on these journeys, returning home with empty pockets, but a mind full of questions. His neighbors thought him a bit mad, this man who would sit by the shore for hours, watching waves crash against rocks, or who would spend entire afternoons studying dust motes dancing in sunbeams. Democritus is at it again, they would say, talking to himself about things no one can see. But Democritus didn't mind their gentle mockery. He had learned something on his travel that changed everything. The art of truly seeing. Not just looking, but seeing. The way a child sees magic in soap bubbles, or the way a gardener sees next year's harvest in a tiny seed. One morning, as the first light painted the eastern sky the color of pale honey, Democritus sat in his modest garden with a simple clay bowl and a chunk of fresh bread from the baker's morning batch. He broke the bread in half. Then he broke one of those halves in half again, and then again, and again. His young neighbor, Leucippus, who often came to listen to the philosopher's unusual ideas, watched with growing puzzlement. "Master Democritus," he finally asked, "what are you doing?" Democritus smiled, that gentle, knowing smile that had earned him his reputation. "I am searching, my friend, for the place where dividing stops." "But surely," Leucippus replied, settling cross-legged on the ground, "you can keep cutting bread forever, until it becomes crumbs, then powder, then, well, until it disappears entirely." "Ah," said Democritus, his eyes twinkling, "but can you? Think about this carefully. If you could truly divide something forever, then what would it be made of? How could anything exist if it had no solid foundation, no ultimate building blocks?" He set down the increasingly small pieces of bread and picked up a smooth stone from the garden path. "Consider this stone. It seems solid, permanent, unchanging. But watch what happens when I place it in the fire." They built a small fire, and Democritus placed the stone among the coals. As they waited, watching the flames dance in the growing daylight, he continued his gentle questioning. "The stone will change, won't it? Heat will make it crack, maybe crumble. Water will wear it smooth over time. Lightning might split it. So what is it really? What is this thing that can become so many other things?" Leucippus frowned thoughtfully. It's the same stone, just in different forms. Getting closer. Democritus nodded approvingly. But let me share with you what I learned from the wise women of Egypt, who understood things that most philosophers miss. He leaned forward conspiratorially, as if sharing the world's most wonderful secret. Everything, and I mean everything, is made of tiny invisible pieces. Pieces so small that no knife can cut them, no fire can change them, no force can destroy them. The Egyptians had a word for something that cannot be cut. Atomos, uncuttable, atoms. These atoms, he continued, settling back comfortably, are like, imagine the smallest possible Lego pieces, so tiny that millions of them could dance on the head of a pin. They come in different shapes, some round like tiny pebbles, some jagged like microscopic thorns, some smooth like invisible pearls. And everything you see, everything you touch, everything you are, it's all just different arrangements of these dancing atoms. Leucippus looked skeptical. But, Master, if I cannot see these atoms, how can I know they exist? Democritus chuckled. That warm laugh that gave him his nickname. My dear friend, you cannot see the wind, yet you know it exists when it moves the leaves. You cannot see your own thoughts, yet here they are, questioning and wondering. The most important things in life are often invisible to our eyes, but perfectly clear to our understanding. He stood and walked to his small olive tree, its leaves rustling softly in the morning breeze. This tree, it's made of atoms arranged in the pattern of tree, the soil beneath it. Atoms arranged in the pattern of earth, you and I. Atoms arranged in the pattern of human being. Even our thoughts, our dreams, our love, all of it the same fundamental building blocks, just arranged differently. But here's the truly beautiful part, Democritus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone revealing a profound mystery. These atoms are eternal. They cannot be created or destroyed, only rearranged. So, in a very real sense, you and I, this tree, this stone, the stars above, we are all made of the same ancient eternal substance. We are, quite literally, connected to everything that has ever been or ever will be. Leucippus sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing this idea. Finally, he asked, "If this is true, Master, then why do things seem so solid, so separate?" Democritus picked up a handful of sand and let it run through his fingers. "Watch this sand," he said gently. "Each grain seems separate, distinct, but pour water over it, and suddenly it becomes a beach, a sculpture, a foundation for a building. The grains haven't changed. Only their relationship to each other has changed." So too with atoms. When they're loosely arranged, you get air or water or the spaces between thoughts. When they're tightly packed and interlocked, you get stones or bones or the foundations of mountains. When they're in flowing patterns, you get rivers, or blood, or the passage of time itself. And here's what the traveling merchants taught me, he added with a smile. Atoms are never still. They're always moving, always dancing, always finding new ways to connect and separate and reconnect. Which means that everything, absolutely everything, is in a constant gentle state of becoming something new. As the sun climbed higher, painting the garden in warm golden light, Democritus and Leucippus sat quietly, each lost in contemplation. Finally, the younger man spoke. Master, if what you say is true, then death is not really an ending, is it? Democritus's eyes grew gentle and warm. Ah, you begin to understand. When a wave crashes on the shore, does the water disappear? Or does it simply return to the sea, ready to become a new wave, a new adventure? Our atoms, the very atoms that allow us to think and feel and love, they are ancient beyond imagining. Some of them were once part of distant stars. Others were once part of great forests, or mighty rivers, or other people who lived and loved and laughed long before we were born. And someday, when our current arrangement of atoms decides to try new patterns, we will become part of flowers and trees, and perhaps even new people who will sit in gardens like this one, wondering about the nature of existence. Leucippus found this strangely comforting. So we are all connected, not just in spirit or philosophy, but literally, physically connected. Exactly. Democritus nodded. The atoms in your hand were once part of ancient seas. The atoms in your heart were once part of primordial stars. You are, quite literally, made of stardust and ocean spray, of the breath of forests and the dreams of mountains. But here's what I find most wonderful, he continued, his voice taking on an almost musical quality. If everything is made of the same basic building blocks, then separation is just an illusion. The boundary between you and me, between us and this tree, between all of us and the cosmos, these are just temporary arrangements, like patterns in sand that the wind will eventually reshape. Leucippus was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Does this mean nothing matters? If we're all just atoms destined to be rearranged, why should we care about anything?" Democritus laughed, not mockingly, but with deep delight. "Oh, my friend, quite the opposite. It means everything matters enormously. Do you love music any less because you know it's made of vibrating air? Do you love a sunset any less because you understand it's light bouncing off tiny particles in the sky? Knowing that we are all temporary arrangements of eternal atoms makes every moment precious, every connection sacred, every act of kindness a small miracle. We are the universe's way of experiencing itself, of loving itself, of wondering about itself." "Think about it," he continued, settling more comfortably against the olive tree. "Right now, in this very moment, atoms that were once part of distant galaxies are arranged in such a way that they can sit in a garden, contemplate their own existence, and feel wonder at the beauty of it all. If that's not magical, I don't know what is." As the morning progressed into afternoon, their conversation meandered like a lazy river, touching on the nature of dreams, atoms in the brain arranging themselves into memories and possibilities, the experience of love, atoms recognizing their eternal kinship, and the meaning of wisdom, understanding that knowing and not knowing are both just different dances of the same cosmic elements. "Master," Leucippus finally asked, "how should we live, knowing what we now know?" Democritus was quiet for a long moment, watching a butterfly dance among his flowers. A creature that was, he reflected, a particularly beautiful arrangement of ancient atoms, temporarily organized into the pattern of flight and color and gentle purpose. "We should live," he said finally, "with wonder, with gratitude, with the recognition that every person we meet is made of the same miracle that makes us. We should treat each moment as the temporary precious gift that it is. We should love generously, because love is atoms recognizing atoms, universe embracing universe. And we should laugh, he added with a grin, because the idea that tiny, invisible pieces could arrange themselves into beings capable of wondering about tiny, invisible pieces is, when you really think about it, absolutely hilarious. As the afternoon light began to deepen into the golden hues of early evening, Democritus and Leucippus sat in comfortable silence. The garden around them hummed with the quiet activity of atoms in endless motion. Bees gathering nectar, leaves rustling in the breeze, flowers slowly turning their faces to follow the sun's path across the sky. "There's one more thing," Democritus said softly, his voice taking on the gentle cadence of someone sharing a final, precious secret. "The atoms that make up your thoughts right now, the very atoms that are allowing you to understand these words, they are not separate from the atoms that make up the evening sky, or the distant mountains, or the stars that will soon appear in the darkness. Which means that your consciousness, your awareness, your capacity to wonder and love and dream, these are not accidents or aberrations. They are the natural result of atoms arranging themselves in patterns complex enough to reflect back on their own nature. So, as you prepare for sleep tonight," he continued, his voice growing softer still, "remember that you are not just resting a body made of flesh and bone. You are allowing ancient stardust to reorganize itself into dreams. You are giving cosmic atoms permission to explore the landscape of imagination and memory. Your dreams tonight will be made of the same fundamental substance as distant galaxies. Your peaceful breathing will be atoms that were once part of primordial oceans, now arranged in the pattern of rest and restoration. And when you wake tomorrow, you will be a slightly new arrangement of the same eternal elements, refreshed, renewed, ready to participate once again in the universe's endless, joyful experiment with consciousness and connection." As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Democritus stood and brushed the dust from his simple robes. Dust that was, he reflected with quiet amusement, made of the same atoms as the stars above. "Sleep well, Leucippus," he said gently. "Sleep well, knowing that you are made of light and stardust, of ancient wisdom and eternal possibility. Sleep well, knowing that even in rest, you are part of the great cosmic dance that connects all things. And perhaps," he added with a final gentle smile, "perhaps tonight you'll dream of atoms, tiny, invisible, eternal, spinning and dancing and arranging themselves into tomorrow's wonders." And so, as the night settles around you like a soft blanket made of darkness and starlight, remember Democritus and his gentle wisdom. Remember that you are not separate from the world around you, but intimately, atomically connected to everything that has ever been or ever will be. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts settle like dust motes in still air, and let yourself drift into sleep knowing that you are both ancient and eternal, both microscopic and infinite, both utterly unique and completely connected to the vast, wonderful mystery of existence. Rest well, dear listener. Rest in the knowledge that you are made of stardust and wonder, arranged temporarily in the beautiful pattern of you. Truth. Tonight, we travel back to ancient Athens, where philosophers gathered in olive groves and spoke of light and shadow, truth and illusion. But don't worry, there won't be any pop quizzes. Just a simple story, about what happens when we finally decide to look up from the comfortable darkness we've grown so used to. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and prepare to meet some people who, like all of us, thought they knew what reality looked like. Picture, if you will, a cave. Not a cozy hobbit hole sort of cave with round doors and pantries full of seed cakes, but a deep, stone chamber that has housed the same group of people for as long as any of them can remember. These people, let's call them the dwellers, have spent their entire lives chained in this cave, facing a wall. Now, before you start feeling too sorry for them, you should know that they don't think of themselves as prisoners. They think of themselves as, well, as people who live in caves and watch shadows on walls. It's all they've ever known. Behind them, though they've never turned to see it, burns a fire, and between the fire and their backs, there's a low wall, like the kind puppet masters hide behind. All day long, people carry objects back and forth along this wall. Carved animals, plants, tools, vessels of clay and bronze. The dwellers see none of this, of course. What they see are the shadows these objects cast on the wall in front of them. A shadow of a horse galloping past, a shadow of a tree swaying, a shadow of a person carrying a water jug. And here's the thing that would be funny if it weren't so. Well, human. The dwellers have names for all these shadows. They've developed quite sophisticated theories about shadow horses and shadow trees. They argue passionately about whether that particular shadow was a large cat or a small dog. Some of them are considered great experts in shadow interpretation. They've built their entire understanding of reality around these dancing shadows. And why wouldn't they? The shadows move, they change, they tell stories. The shadows are, well, they're all there is. Now, among these dwellers is someone we'll call Sophia, which means wisdom, though she doesn't know that yet. Sophia has always been a bit restless. While others debate the finer points of shadow taxonomy, she finds herself wondering about things that don't quite make sense. Why do the shadows sometimes seem more solid than other times? Why do they always move in the same direction? And what is that strange, warm glow she sometimes thinks she can almost glimpse at the very edge of her vision? The other dwellers think Sophia asks too many questions, but questioning, as we're about to discover, is sometimes the first step toward stepping. One day, and days in the cave are measured not by sun and moon, but by the rhythm of shadows. Something unprecedented happens. Sophia's chains break. Now, we could spend time wondering how or why this happened. Perhaps the chains were old. Perhaps her restless shifting had worn them thin. Or perhaps, and this is what the old philosophers might have suggested, perhaps the chains were never as strong as they seemed, and all it took was the right kind of questioning to weaken them. Sophia feels the weight lift from her shoulders and wrists. For the first time in her life, she can move, and the first thing she does is absolutely nothing. Think about it. If you'd spent your entire existence facing one direction, would your first instinct be to turn around? Or would you sit there feeling the strangeness of freedom, maybe flexing your fingers, maybe wondering if this was some sort of elaborate shadow trick? Sophia chooses wonder over fear. Slowly, so slowly that her muscles protest, she turns her head and sees the fire. Now, you might expect her to be amazed, delighted, enlightened. But the first thing Sophia experiences is pain. The light hurts her eyes, which have known only the soft gray of reflected shadow. She blinks, squints, turns away. This is too bright. Her mind protests. This is wrong. This hurts. But Sophia has always been stubborn in her curiosity. Despite the pain, she looks again. And gradually, the way your eyes adjust when you walk from a bright room into darkness except in reverse, she begins to see. The fire dances and flickers. Real light, not shadow light. And there, silhouetted against the flame, she sees people, real people carrying real objects. The horse is not a shadow. It's a carved wooden horse, painted brown and white, with a real mane made of actual hair. Sophia stands, her legs shaking, unused to bearing weight, and begins to walk toward the fire. Each step is a small revelation. The ground beneath her feet is not the smooth certainty she imagined, but rough stone with texture and temperature. She reaches out and touches the low wall. Stone, cool and solid, and absolutely undeniably real. One of the object carriers notices her and stops. "You're not supposed to be back here," he says, not unkindly. "This is where we work." "Work?" Sophia asks. "Making the shadows," he explains, as if this should be obvious, "for the people in the cave." And this is when Sophia realizes that what she thought was reality was, well, let's be generous and call it a performance, a show. The shadows that she and her fellow dwellers had spent their lives studying, categorizing, arguing about, they were created, intentionally, by people who lived in a world of fire and stone and carved wooden horses. "But why?" she asks. The object carrier shrugs. "It's what we've always done. It's what they expect to see." Sophia looks back toward her former companions, still chained, still watching shadows, still debating whether that particular silhouette represents a large rabbit or a small deer. They seem so small from this perspective, and so certain of their shadow wisdom. "Shouldn't they know?" she asks. "Shouldn't they know about this?" The object carrier looks uncomfortable. "Most people prefer the shadows," he says. "Easier on the eyes, easier on the mind." But Sophia has always been the type to choose difficult truths over comfortable illusions. She walks to the mouth of the cave and discovers that there is a mouth to the cave, an opening she never knew existed. And beyond that opening, light, real light, not the orange flicker of fire, but something golden and warm and so bright, it makes the cave fire seem like a single candle in comparison. This time, the pain is almost unbearable. Sophia covers her eyes, stumbles, considers turning back. The cave fire suddenly seems wonderfully moderate. The shadows suddenly seem perfectly adequate. But she doesn't turn back. What Sophia discovers outside the cave is not just light, but the source of all light, the sun. And in the sun's light, she sees the world as it actually is. Not shadows of trees, but trees themselves, oak and olive and cypress, their leaves rustling in a wind that she can feel on her skin. Not shadows of animals, but actual creatures, birds singing melodies that have nothing to do with echoes on cave walls, deer stepping delicately through grass that is green and soft, and utterly real. She sees that the wooden horse, so impressive by firelight, is merely a copy, a shadow of these magnificent beings that run freely across hills she never imagined existed. The sun, she realizes, is not just another fire, bigger and brighter. The sun is what makes seeing possible. The sun is what makes truth visible. Without it, even the cave fire is just another kind of darkness. Sophia spends, well, time works differently in the sunlight. But let's say she spends a long while just sitting on a hillside, letting her eyes adjust, letting her mind expand to accommodate this vast, bright, impossibly rich reality. She begins to understand that everything she thought she knew was not wrong, exactly, but incomplete. The shadows were real, as shadows, but they were shadows of something infinitely more complex and beautiful. And then, because Sophia has always been generous in her curiosity, she thinks of her friends back in the cave. Surely they would want to know about this. Surely they would want to see the sun, feel the wind, touch the actual grass. Wouldn't they? So she returns to the cave, but here's where the story takes a turn that's both sad and, if you squint at it right, rather funny. Sophia's eyes, now accustomed to sunlight, can barely see in the cave's dimness. She stumbles, bumps into walls, struggles to make out the shadow play that once seemed so clear and important. "Look," she calls to her fellow dwellers, her voice bright with excitement. "I've seen something amazing. There's a whole world outside, full of light and color and..." "Quiet," one of them hisses. "You're disrupting the shadow patterns." But that's just it. Sophia persists. The shadows aren't the real thing. They're copies of copies. There are actual horses out there, not just horse shadows. There are trees and sky and the most incredible light. The dwellers turn to look at her, and what they see is someone who can no longer properly interpret shadows, someone who stumbles in what they consider normal light, someone whose stories make no sense according to everything they know to be true. "She's been damaged," one of them murmurs. "Brain fever," suggests another. "The cave light was too much for her," concludes a third. "Now she sees things that aren't there and can't see things that are." And so Sophia faces a choice that anyone who has ever tried to share a difficult truth will recognize. She can insist, argue, try to force her friends to see what she has seen. Or she can accept that some gifts can only be received when someone is ready to receive them. She chooses patience. She chooses to let her life in the sunlight be its own argument. She chooses to trust that truth, like the sun itself, has a way of reaching people when the time is right. Now, you might be wondering what this ancient story has to do with you, here, in your comfortable bed, in the 21st century, with electric lights and smartphones in a world that seems nothing like a cave full of shadow watchers. And yet, think about the stories we tell ourselves about what's real, what's important, what's possible. Think about the shadows we mistake for the things themselves. Maybe our shadows are the endless scroll of social media, where we watch curated glimpses of other people's lives and mistake them for reality. Maybe our shadows are the news cycle that show us fragments of the world, often the most dramatic and frightening fragments, and convince us that these shadows represent the full truth of human existence. Maybe our shadows are the stories we tell ourselves about our own limitations, our own worth, our own possibilities. Stories that feel so real, so solid, so unchangeable that we forget they might just be shadows. The ancient Greeks who told this story weren't trying to make us feel bad about our shadow watching. They understood that shadows are often all we have to work with. They understood that the journey from shadow to firelight to sunlight is gradual, often painful, and always optional. But they also understood something else, that there is always more light available than we think. The fire behind us, the fire of reason, of questioning, of looking a little deeper than we're comfortable looking. That fire is always burning. We just have to turn around. The sunlight beyond the cave, the light of direct experience, of unmediated truth, of reality as it actually is rather than as we think it should be, that light is always shining. We just have to be willing to let our eyes adjust. And here's the thing the old philosophers knew, the thing that makes this story not just ancient wisdom, but practical guidance. The sun doesn't care whether we see it or not. Truth doesn't depend on our recognition. Reality continues to be real whether we're paying attention or not. But we are different when we step into the light. We see more clearly. We understand more deeply. We love more freely. Not because we're better than the shadow watchers, but because we've allowed ourselves to see what was always there, waiting for us to turn around. The Greeks had a word, aletheia, which we translate as truth, but which literally means uncovering or unhiding. Truth, they believed, wasn't something you created or constructed or argued into existence. Truth was something you discovered by removing the coverings, by stepping out of the shadows, by allowing yourself to see what was already there. And the most beautiful part of this understanding, you don't have to see everything at once. You don't have to blind yourself with too much light too quickly. You just have to be willing to turn your head, to take a step, to ask a question that might lead you somewhere brighter than where you started. So, as you settle into sleep tonight, consider this gentle invitation from our ancient story. What if the reality you inhabit is already more beautiful, more luminous, more full of possibility than you usually allow yourself to believe? What if the shadows you've been watching, the fears, the limitations, the stories about what's impossible, what if they're just shadows, real as shadows, but not the whole truth? What if somewhere behind you there's a fire of understanding waiting to be noticed, and beyond that, a sun of pure awareness, pure aliveness, pure connection to everything that is? You don't have to turn around right now. You don't have to change anything. The fire will keep burning. The sun will keep shining. Truth is patient. But maybe, as you drift towards sleep, you can feel the warmth of that light on your shoulders. Maybe you can sense the vast, bright world that exists not in opposition to your daily life, but as the deepest truth of your daily life. Sophia, you remember, chose to return to the cave sometimes. Not because she had to, but because she understood that everyone's journey toward the light is their own. She learned to see the shadows for what they were, neither more nor less than shadows, and to carry the memory of sunlight like a gentle secret, a quiet gift that changed how she moved through even the darkest spaces. This is what wisdom looks like, the Greeks might have said. Not the frantic insistence that everyone see what you see, but the quiet confidence that light, like water, finds its way into every crack, every crevice, every corner where it's needed. Your breath is slowing now, your body settling into the softness that comes before sleep. And perhaps you can imagine yourself not as someone trapped in a cave, but as someone who carries a little bit of sunlight wherever you go. Someone who knows that behind every shadow is something casting it, and behind every something casting a shadow is a light that never goes out. The ancient story ends here, but your story continues in dreams, in morning light, in every moment you choose to turn your face toward whatever truth is available to you. Sleep well, knowing that the sun that warmed Sophia's face 2,500 years ago is the same sun that will greet you tomorrow. And in between, rest easy in the shadows, knowing they're not the whole story. Good night.